The 13th century Sufi mystic Jalal ad-Din Muhammad Rumi is widely regarded as the greatest poet writing in the Persian language. He lived from 1207 to 1273, and like many Middle Eastern philosophers of the time, he travelled widely throughout the land during his life. And like many Persians in the early 13th century, his travels brought him in 1244 to the ancient Anatolian city of Konya, now in modern Turkey. Konya had become an important cultural centre, meeting place and refuge for educated Muslims following the Mongol invasion of Iran in 1219. And it was here that he met the celebrated Sufi mystic Shamsi Tabrizi, who proved to have a profound influence on him and with whom he developed a very close relationship. In fact, the story goes that Shams had been searching the Middle East for anyone who would endure his company, and when asked what he would give for such a relationship, he replied he would even die for it. Incredibly, just 4 years later, Shams was murdered. This devastating personal tragedy for Rumi triggered an outpouring of over 1,000 lyric poems in what became known as the Divan-i Shamsi Tabrizi. These poems all expound different aspects of Sufi mysticism and spirituality using allegorical imagery. And what is so extraordinary about them is not only the strength and beauty of their imagery and language, but also their ability to expound true Sufi spirituality and to propose paths to spiritual enlightenment. One of Rumi's most characteristic fingerprints is the concept of Khamush, which appears in the final verse of almost every poem. This word Khamush means literally to close or to turn off, like to turn off a light, for example. But it also means to stop speaking, to close one's mouth, and to remain silent. So in the poems, no matter how wild or noisy or exciting the events he depicts, Rumi always returns us to that quiet, reflective state of Khamush in the final verse. This is to allow the giver of speech to speak, or to open our hearts and enjoy the connection with God. For my work Khamush, I chose 3 poems from this collection. In the first poem, Khizid Osheron, Lovers Make Ready, Rumi invites us as good Sufi, the lovers, to leave the garden of this world and to aspire to that other garden. But once there, we realize that our desire to reach this other garden has been fueled by egoism and self-centeredness, something which good Sufi are taught rigorously to avoid. And so we must pass by both these beautiful gardens and proceed further on to the gardener himself, in other words, to God. In the third verse, Rumi describes the journey of the lovers using the image of a torrent of water flowing down to the sea. Once there, they float on the water, cheering. Here, the words kafsanon mean literally to applaud or to cheer. But they also mean bubbles, like the bubbles that appear on the surface of the water after it has been disturbed by somebody diving in, for example. In the fourth verse, the lovers' excitement and passion leads them to their wedding, and here they come face to face with God. God's face is red as saffron. They blush in shyness, thus turning their own cheeks to the same colour. In the fifth verse, Rumi alludes to the Sufi experience of that joy which comes from a close connection with God. He uses the image of quivering leaves on the branches to describe the lovers' fear of falling from this ecstatic state. Their hearts pound from worry, so they go on to what he calls the safe house of the presence of God. In the final Khamush verse, Rumi instructs us to keep silent and to allow the giver of speech to speak. Whatever he says, we must do likewise. In this first movement, I've taken Rumi's idea almost literally and set the first 5 verses using only wordless voices and instruments. Only the text of the final Khamush verse is actually heard, as if the singers are inviting us to receive the message of the poem through the music alone. The second poem, Bia Buse Bechandast, Come Precious Kiss, contains some of Rumi's most overtly sensuous imagery, constantly returning us to the idea of the kiss, Buse, as a metaphor for the Sufi concept of connection with God and spiritual enlightenment. But it is also a powerfully moralistic poem, instructing us Sufi that this kiss does not come for free. It has to be wanted, needed, and it has to be earned. In the second verse, Rumi even says that if this kiss is only deserved by the dust, we should be ready to die for it. In the third verse, Rumi compares the kiss to the pearl in the seashell. In order to reach that pearl, we must first break open the shell within us. And in the fourth verse, the kiss is compared to a flower. In this case, we assume this to be the flower of the opium poppy. Rumi writes that this flower is so potent that even the wine is excited by it. In order to reach it, the tongues of the world must be thrust out like a lily's stamen. In the fifth verse, Rumi warns us against arrogance or feelings of self-importance. It's wrong to feel like a king or like a sun or a moon. If so, we should not expect that kiss. Both these images, the sun, Khorshid, and the moon, Mor, are used as metaphors for God. In the sixth verse, Rumi addresses God directly. He asks the moon to come out because he's ready to receive that kiss. So finally, Rumi invites us once again to stay silent and to open the pinhole in our hearts. Only in this way and through this tiny pinhole can we hope to receive the enjoyment of that connection with God. In the third poem, Eoshegon Omad Gahe, Hey lovers, the time has come, God's blessing is invoked on a wedding feast. The wedding is full of happiness, wine, music and dancing. In the second verse, Rumi writes, Isarkoshon, Omad Tarab Domon Keshon. Hey happy ones, the time of trailing skirts is here. This is a clear reference to the ancient Sufi ritual of whirling dances, nowadays popularized in Turkey as the whirling dervishes, and those long skirts the dancers wear. Rumi was of course himself a dervish, and these dances were practiced as part of the traditional Sufi ceremony of Samon, where the participants attempt to reach a state of religious ecstasy and lose all sense of self. In the third verse, this ecstatic state is further aided by the welcome arrival of some fiery wine. Ahmad Sharobe ot Tashin, and any dreary philosophers or ponderers of life and death are firmly sent away. After thanking God, for whom the seven worlds are drunk, the musicians are instructed to play on and never to tire, at every moment to shake those bells, to strike them and enliven us as a beautiful morning. These bells are represented in the music by some rather special mallets which I built for all four percussionists. They are heavy oak mallets, like this one here, with brass jingles inserted into the shafts. This means that every stroke played on the drums or the marimbas is automatically coupled with the sound of these jingles. The effect therefore sounds like at least 8 percussionists instead of just 4, and gives the impression of a whole troupe of dancers with bells on their ankles and accompanied by drummers. In the next verse, Rumi brings another exotic musical instrument into the festivities. This time it is the ney from the fields. Rumi writes, Hey, sweet howl of the ney from the fields, your howl has the taste of sugar. Night and day your howls bring me the smell of royalty. The ney is an extremely ancient wind instrument which originated some 5,000 years ago and is still played widely throughout the Middle East today. It is used frequently in Rumi's poetry to symbolize the soul of the Sufi through which the breath of God is invited to flow. The instrument's hollow void thus represents the ideal of emptiness or selflessness to which all Sufi should aspire, and is that necessary state to receive the connection with God through his breath. The instrument is made from a piece of hollow cane or giant reed with finger holes and is blown from the end. In Khamush, the sound of this instrument is represented by the altos singing through kazoos. In the 7th verse, Rumi once again addresses the musicians. "Start again," he says. "Tune those frets on your instruments," thus urging them to play on throughout the night until dawn. Finally, and once again using the metaphor of the sun, Rumi asks God to bestow his blessing on all the revelers. "Direct your caresses to all good people. Hey, fair-faced sun." This is once again to prepare us for the final Khamush verse. Khamush kon parde madar. Be silent. Keep the curtains closed. Drink the wine in silence. Cover up, and be tamed through the knowledge of God. The recording of Khamush, which you can now hear on YouTube, represents a long-held dream of mine to bring together two exceptional ensembles with which I have been able to enjoy a close relationship for many years. Firstly, the percussion group Amadinda, which I have known ever since they were first founded in 1984 by Zoltán Ratz. Zoltán brought his newly founded quartet to Darmstadt that year, where I was running the percussion studio of the International Summer Courses for New Music, and very soon we developed a close friendship. A few years later, in 1989, we toured England together, and for that occasion I wrote a work specially for them. This was Village Burial with Fire, a work which became a central part not only of their repertoire, but also of many other percussion ensembles around the world. My close association with the Rias Kammerchor, and indeed the incredible pianist Philip Mayers, began in 2006 when I was invited to tour the United States and Canada with them. The intense 7-week project turned out to be something of a life-changing experience for me, and was one of the main factors which triggered my decision to move to Germany the following year. Finally, I would like to acknowledge the crucial help I received from my friend and colleague Kaveh Vares. Kaveh is an Iranian composer currently based in Amsterdam, and I was fortunate enough to be introduced to him as an expert and keen admirer of Rumi's work. We met several times in Amsterdam, often for many hours, to discuss every minute aspect of these incredible texts. And we continued meeting via Skype and corresponding by email throughout the whole period of composition. The recording of Khamush was made during rehearsals and performance at the Bartók National Concert Hall in Budapest in October 2019, and I'm profoundly grateful to MUPA Budapest for making this possible.